What's up YouTube? Today's video I'm going to go over the Dex Stacking Venom Gyre build, and this is a build I saw kind of on PoE Ninja, and I was kind of surprised by how high the damage was whenever I looked at it. So I decided to try it out for myself, and I do think that Ascendant does end up being a better version for Dex Stacking Venom Gyre, purely because you don't really benefit from long shot from Deadeye, and Ascendant is actually able to generate a lot of rage, which allows you to use Berserk a lot more, but this is pretty much just Dex Stacking Venom Gyre. Ascendant doing Simulacrum. Now, Simulacrum is pretty easy on this build, and I was able to do a couple deathless in a row. And even though the character is not even that tanky, like I didn't even try to get ailment immunity or anything, but cold damage and freeze is just really busted in terms of keeping you alive. So you can see here, the damage is pretty incredible, and at this point, I think in the character, it's probably half of what I currently have in the PoB, and it just absolutely decimates the boss. Well, kind of. But here you can see Kosis dies incredibly fast once you throw out your blades. And this is one of the few builds that can get 7 rewards on Simulacrum relatively easy if the bosses spawn next to each other, which is something that you can't really say for a lot of builds. And that's a wave 29, and this is going to be wave 30. It's an absolute blast to play. It's my favorite version of Venom Gyre purely because I like the shatter sound. And the shattering sound just feels so nice. I do think that this build works very well. With a variety of different belts. So say you have Mage Blood, you have Headhunter, and there's just a lot of different options that will work. So you can see here, the boss spawn. And again, the bosses didn't spawn next to each other. And without the bosses spawning next to each other, 7 is pretty much impossible. And Kosis is up here. And let's see how fast he dies. So you can see once you throw out all the blades, you just whirling blades and the boss just melts. And I think this damage is not even that crazy at the moment, and you can definitely get 4 times this damage once you get better gear, because my gear is not really crazy at the moment in time. So this is a fear. I think this was nearly 300% quant with triple life mods. And Venom Gyre is pretty good in the fear purely because of, what's it called? Of chain. Like built-in chain of a lot of mobs means that the bosses kind of just get melted. And this is, I think, triple HP. Let me see if I actually press tab at the end. But let's see, what were the mods of this? So you can see it's 94% more monster life. So it's not really a triple HP, it's just 94% more monster life and a bunch of damage mods. And 272% quant. So not too bad, but not too crazy either. Like it could be reduced crit and then it would be pretty hard. But that's basically just a quick little showcase of what Dex Stacking Venom Gyre looks like. But let's get straight into this build. And it's going to be like a pseudo little guide. It's not going to be super in-depth, but I'm just going to go over the items and the basics of how you can play this setup. So first off, you might be wondering why Ascendant. Well, unlike Spectral Throw, Venom Gyre does not benefit at all really from Long Shot. And Long Shot is what makes Spectral Throw so good because when it returns, it counts as part of the distance traveled. So what Long Shot does is it deals 20% less damage to targets at the start and 60% more damage as the projectile travels further. So for Spectral Throw, a lot of times you get 60% more damage because you don't actually benefit at this with this from all, and you would take 2 additional projectiles. It's actually really useless to take that node. Now, Deadeye does get 1 chain and 2 projectiles. The 1 chain doesn't really matter too much because you get +1 chain on Divergent Venom Gyre, and then the 2 projectiles is not too crazy because if you take the Deadeye portion of the Ascendancy, you get 1 additional projectile already. So it's pretty much just a difference of using 1 Megalomaniac or Large Cluster, and a Megalomaniac is not really that bad. And most importantly, extra passive points with the Ascendant are extremely important for any attribute stackers. Getting more passive points is huge because it allows you to take more of these large clusters that are extremely point efficient. And I do think that the biggest point of contention for why Ascendant is better is because you can take this Berserker notable that gains you 1 rage on hit with attacks no more than once per 0.3 seconds. Now, this actually stacks with the glove mod. So you can see here, this glove mod has gain 1 rage on hit with attacks no more than once every 0.7 seconds. So every single time you attack, you can actually gain 2 rage back. So you can gain maximum rage really, really fast. It feels amazing to play, and it does feel like you have a lot of room for berserking, and this is without having to pay attention to General's Cry with Warbringer on the Berserker. So it's an easier playstyle. It gives you a lot of chances to use Berserk in the important parts of the fight, and it makes you tankier. And the skill tree is pretty much identical to the Deadeye variant because you can just take this node, Path of the Ranger, and start off at the Ranger area. So it's an identical tree to the traditional Dex Stacking Deadeyes. And it's a pretty point efficient tree overall. Now for the tree overview, let's go over it real fast. This is a very point efficient tree, and you do use a massive Thread of Hope next to Charisma, and this Thread of Hope is insanity. You get Path of the Hunter, you get Finesse, you get Weapon Artistry, you get Aspect of the Lynx, and these nodes do benefit from Brutal Restraint. You get Forces of Nature, you can get this node here, Sleight of Hand. You can also get this node here, Blood Siphon, which gives you some life. So it's an incredible Thread of Hope. And I think it costs around 6 exalts. So like any other claw build and elusive effect build, you always want to take the dagger cluster to get elusive effect multi on Nightblade, and then you want to get the claw mastery. So we do take the full claw nodes and full dagger nodes. And let's see here. You can choose to take up to 2 suppression wheels, and this is a pretty good thing in a sense that you're right next to these suppression nodes. So if you don't have the best of gear, you can take 2 suppression clusters and you could probably get like 60% suppression by itself. So it's huge in terms of helping you out with gearing. And as you can see here, you can actually get percent dexterity on this suppression cluster. So this suppression cluster is not too bad because it's within range of the Brutal Restraint. Now we do use 1 cold mastery down here, and these are just because it's super point efficient and it gives you pen, which we sorely need because we don't use Omni. And then cold mastery gives you an extra 5% pen. And we do take any efficient crit nodes because it's kind of hard to get crit capped. So here we take lethality, and then over here is Heartseeker. This build does use 2 large clusters, and the large clusters are kind of up to you. You can use the traditional clusters that are like Fan of Blade, Feed to Fury, Fuel to Fight. Or you can use the Dex Stacking clusters with 35% effect and then Dex and all attributes. So you can see here, you can use attack damage, Feed to Fury, 35% effect, 8 Dex, and 3 all attributes. And you can also even use cold clusters like Blanketed Snow and Blast Freeze or something like that gives you Cold Pen, and that's another option. There's a lot of different varieties of what large clusters you can use, and it helps you out a lot. So this build has a lot of different variations that you can do depending on your budget. Now, like I said, Ascendancy overview, you want to be Berserker and you want to be Deadeye. Now, for the Forbidden Jewels, you can either choose to be Raider or Elementalist. Now, Elementalist is kind of nice because if you have any flat lighting damage on your gear, it actually gives you 10% shocked on bosses, because shock from your hits always increase damage taken by at least 10%. And it also gives you an extra 20% pen because we get cold exposure on our gloves. And 20% pen is pretty good. It might not showcase as the best on PoB, but if the mob actually has 20% cold res extra, the 20% cold pen is huge value. Now, Raider is really nice because you can actually get Onslaught, and if you don't actually have the Mark Mastery for Frenzy charges, it's actually probably around the same damage as Elementalist. But if you have the Mark Mastery, Raider loses a lot of its value. But getting perma phasing and then 20% spell suppress is nothing to joke about. But Raider, I think the Forbidden Jewel is very expensive. Now, if you don't want to use any Forbidden Jewels, you can actually get more damage or nearly the same with just 2x 4 prop damage jewels. And I'm not really sure how much 4 prop damage jewels are, but they probably run a couple exalts. So there's a lot of different varieties about which jewels you want to use for Ascendancies. Now, for the weapon overview, now this is a pretty cool thing, is that you can either choose to use an 11 or 10 link claw of Squire. And my current build, we were trying to make an 11 link claw with the Dex Stacking mod, but it's pretty hard to do, and we didn't really succeed yet, but we're still trying, kind of. You can see here, the current claw that we have is this one, so it has Socketed Gems are supported by level 20 crit strikes, level 20 elemental damage of attacks, 40% more attack damage, and then we actually have a regular attack speed mod. It should be level 20 faster attacks, but it's not like too big of a damage difference because you get a lot of attack speed from your body armor, as we'll see later. And then we have 2 to 4 cold damage per 10 dex. And then we're missing the crit damage roll with the level 20 socketed crit damage, but instead I just crafted on 5% chance to deal double damage. Now, if you can't really afford this claw, or this claw doesn't really exist yet, and it is made through recombinators, you can buy one of these bad boys. I think this thing runs around 20x or so, or 15 to 20x. I see a lot of these up. And this is pretty much just an Imperial Claw with T1 Cold, the Dex Stacking mod, and 29% attack speed. And then it is multi-modded with Crit Chance and then Pen. I'm not really sure why there's so many of these, but these two claws are both very good. And if you use this traditional claw, you'll use a % Dex Synthesized Shield. Now, for the items, Fractal Dots is a mandatory item. So let me just go in the game and I can show you real fast. Fractal Dots, and the reason why Fractal Dots is so good, it gives you a bunch of elemental damage. So you can actually get like 200% elemental damage, 40% crit multi, and then 15% increased dex if your strength is higher than int. So this helm is completely cracked. If you look at here, 1.4 million, you take off the helm, 900,000. So it's kind of like the crown of eyes of strength stackers, of dex stackers, I mean. Now for the amulet, you want to look for something with dexterity implicit synthesize. So you can see here it costs around 2 to 3x for the base. And then you pretty much just spam dex essences until you get T1 attributes, all attributes, and then you can reforge crit to get crit multi or crit chance. And then after that, you can do Veiled Chaos Orb to get the projectile speed, projectile damage. So it's a pretty simple craft once you buy the base, not too crazy expensive. Now the rings, you can choose to use synthesized dexterity rings, but if you're not using a mage blood, you're probably going to have some trouble with resist. But these rings cost around like 10 to 11x, and then you have to roll it with either the crit multi essence until you get T1 dex, and then or you could try to roll it some other way and just use a T1 dex essence and spam it. And if you want resist because you don't have a mage blood with a resist flask, then you probably want to prioritize getting some resist on these rings instead of the crit multi roll and the synthesized dexterity roll. So there is a lot of budget options for this in the sense that you can just use a regular high resist ring with T1 dex and it's probably not too bad. Now for the body armor, this body armor has a mandatory mod. It is 1% attack speed per 25 dexterity. And this mod can pretty much get you up to almost 100% attack speed. So for this chest, you want to be prioritizing that % attack speed per 25 dexterity mod and T1 dexterity. And ideally, you don't want chance to suppress spell damage, and you do want % dexterity, and it should be on an Elder chest, but I just wasn't able to afford the chest right now. You can see here, this 1% attack speed per 25 dexterity is actually a breach mod, so you have to recombine that mod with like T1% dex and T1 dex to get the perfect chest. Now, you can also not use T1 dexterity and settle with attack crit, because your crit chance is probably going to have a big issue if you don't have a 10 or 11 link claw. So there's a lot of different options for the body armor. Now, the gloves, you pretty much want to make sure the implicits are cold exposure and gain 1 rage. And everything else, you just want dex, suppress, and attack speed. And you want it to have some life on it. And you want to be able to craft on increased damage while leeching. This one shouldn't be too hard to craft. Now, Mage Blood is something that is super good in terms of fixing a lot of your issues. If you don't have Mage Blood, you can choose to use a synthesized % dexterity belt, and that should actually be a lot more damage on single target, probably by around like 20% when I popped it out. And if you're mapping, and you could also use a Headhunter, which actually it does have 50 to 60 dex with the attributes on it, and Venom Gyre is a build that scales really, really well with Headhunter due to the amount of projectiles you can get and additional chains. So there's a lot of different options for the belt depending on your budget. Now we move on to the boots, and the boots does have one mandatory mod, and you do want to have 2 to 4 this Dex mod on here. And the problem with this Dex mod is it's a Sentinel mod, and you can see here the cheapest here is like 7x. You don't need Tailwind on it because you don't actually need it since you have Tailwind on your Ascendancy. So this thing you can expect to spend anywhere around like 7 to 10 exalts. If you do want like life and T1 dex, it's probably going to cost like 15 to 20. So like something like this, well, you don't want pierce on the boots, so this thing's actually bricked. So there's a lot of different options, and it's probably easier to just buy one, or you can try to gamble and recombine them together to get a better pair of boots. Now, the problem with these boots is that this is already a prefix mod, so it's pretty hard to actually craft it out because you're going to have a prefix and then you're going to have a T1 dex suffix already, so you're kind of screwed in terms of that. So the gear does all have a lot of different budget options, and it also has a lot of very high-end options, making this build having a very high ceiling but also kind of a high floor. You can see here boots, amulet, rings, chest, And this is my body armor that I'm currently using, and the belt has a lot of different options. Now for the jewel overview, there is a jewel that's very important. You want a brutal restraint in the ranger area. And the brutal restraint, what you can get is you can get percent dexterity. I do think the best brutal restraints come with like 25% dex, which is kind of crazy. So you can get 5% here, 5% here, 5% here, 5% here, 5% here, and maybe even 5% here. So lots of different options depending on how well rolled it is. You can probably find it on TFT, but it does cost like 80x if you get a really perfect one. Wash's Eye should probably be Hatred Crit or Hatred Cold Pen, and I'm currently using a Hatred Crit one because I can't really cap out my crit chance that well. Chance to evade attack hits is actually huge because you can see here with that mod, I'm able to get 89% evade chance, which is actually makes it near impossible for the mob to hit me. In order for a mob to hit me, they have to roll the 90% evasion chance, they have to roll the 40% elusive effect, and then they have to roll the 25 to 30% block. So it's probably like a less than 1% chance to get hit by a mob. So you can pretty much face tank Kosis until you get unlucky and get killed. Now, you can use up to 3 Megalomaniacs if you want a lot more projectiles. So every single one of these jewel slots, you can technically drop the forbidden jewels and then just run 2 more Megalomaniacs, and then you can get 4 extra projectiles, which should help out a lot for getting more blades. And of course, don't forget about the massive thread of hope near the charisma area. Now, for the playstyle, a lot of people wonder how exactly do you play this build. So basically, you want to put down the totem for a boss fight, and you want to start like pre-stacking your Venom Gyres. You can see here there's 30 blades that come out. And once you see the number is 30, you kind of want to whirling blades and get rid of the blades so that you're not capped out on the blades because you can't catch more than 30. Now, when you're catching stuff and it's coming out and you want to do a boss, you can actually go back and forth on top of the boss. If you take off always attack without moving and then just hovering over the boss, and it'll make your character go back and forth over him so that you're able to perfectly shotgun. Now, every single one of these blades can actually shotgun because they're actually fired off sequentially and not counted as one attack at a time. So that's why Venom Gyre actually does so much more damage than what it shows on the PoB, because it has shotgun potential. So like I said, try to use Whirling Blades whenever you see you have 30 blades up. And you should be using Whirling Blades in name lock, and you have to have always attack without moving off. Now, I am using Vol Grace and Vol Molten Shell, and if you're doing simulacrums, whenever you see Kosis or Omniphobia pop up, you can just pop Vol Grace and Vol Molten Shell, and there's no way your character can die. Now, you're actually able to proc Fortify with Whirling Blades purely because the damage is so high. So you can see here, the Fortify hit on this Whirling Blades is 30,788. Which is pretty crazy in terms of how much damage you're able to get. Let's see here. Your auras, you want to run Determination, Grace, Defiance Banner, and Hatred. So here, you actually should have enough mana left over. I am running a level 4 Enlightened though. So you have Defiance Banner, Grace, Determination, Hatred in your chest with the Enlightened. And these auras are not too bad. It makes the character semi-okay on tankiness. We have 14k armor, 37,000 evasion. We are 75 res with 100% spell suppression. And if you're using a Mage Blood, you're kind of able to almost use like triple Mage Blood Elemental Flask, which does help out a lot in terms of tankiness. But the biggest thing is that this build archetype is very versatile. You can pretty much use any attack skill. You can use Frost Blaze, you can use Lightning Strike, and it's all going to be pretty good. The build is actually surprisingly tanky because you can't really get hit with the attacks like we did. I did some Uber Eater of Worlds, and you actually don't really die against the tentacles. I don't really know why. I guess they just can't hit me with evasion. So evasion kind of OP. And you can definitely level the simulacrums to 100. You can do deathless simulacrums. Cold damage and freeze is incredibly underrated in terms of survivability. And if you want to hear a really satisfying sound, the sound of shattering is really, really good. And I do think that one of the reasons why the build is so survivable, personally to me, is that the Watcher's Eye with 8% additional chance to evade attack hits is incredibly overpowered. And being able to get 90+% evade chance is huge. And I do think that Dex Stacking Venom Gyre is my favorite archetype. It does cost a decent bit to start off. You do need the Dex Stacking mod on the Claw. and you do need the Dex Stacking mod on the boots. So those are the two main mandatory items, but I think those two items together do still come out to be cheaper than the Strength Stacking Venom Gyre's boots, right? The Replica Albaron's Warpath. But let me know down below if you tried this archetype out, or if you played Dex Stacking a lot this league, and what you think about it. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more Meters, Exalts, and Mage Plus than me. And see you next time. Bye!